Hello, everyone. I'm Jacob Nordby. I am so glad you're here. I feel like I really know most of you um, because we've been circulating through a writing group, through the Julia Cameron course, through the cohort that is forming for the fall writing retreat in Santa Fe. So I don't feel like I'm a stranger from most of your names, but I'm so glad if this is the first time we're actually meeting like this, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And I'm going to touch closed captioning. I often forget to do that, and I realize that that actually helps a lot of us feel like we can engage. All right, just use chat. How many of you had already read Bird by Bird before in the past, before this invitation? Yes, yes, me. 2003. Yeah, Meredith. Mine was a long time ago. I think you got me beat though. First time, yes, some of it a long time ago, read it, loved it, just received mine. Okay, excellent. Yeah, I wanted to get a sense of kind of where we all are with that because it is such a powerful book. Those of you who've read it a long time ago, just drop in chat. What are some of the things that the first time you read it, it did for you? It helped you realize, it made you feel or think, or the relief it might have given you. I'd just love to see a couple of notes in chat here on that. To accept the shitty first drafts. Oh my God. I was just going to say that was probably the most powerful thing for me when I first read it, because I was in the middle of a first draft and didn't know where to go. And so that really made a difference for me. Having the not just the ability, but the permission from this amazing writer to say, no, this, what you write at first is not supposed to be great. All right, let's see here. Cheryl says, I realize real writers struggle just like I was struggling. My God, what a great point. Grace, I got your note. I will. Let's see here. Nancy, shitty first drafts. Yes, little by little, bird by bird, keep it simple. Hope that anyone can be a writer. The power of detail, progress for not perfection. Okay, this is amazing. So you really did capture it. Last year, before I was actually activated the impulse to get a hold of Sam Lamott, Annie's son, who you've met through the books. I was listening to Bird by Bird, and I heard Sam's name, and Sam and I have been friends for a long time. And so I texted him that night just on a fly and said hi. And that began this process of, hey, can we do something together with your mom? And it felt like touch and go all the way through, but then it happened and it was amazing. And so Bird by Bird for me is a book that I've probably read 5 or 6 times, maybe more. Every time I read it, I feel re-encouraged to stay with the craft, stay with the job of writing a bird at a time and doing the next thing, creating the next thing that matters. So I'm glad you've been experiencing good things. Let's see here. Let's start with the first question here. And I'm going to ask you, this is 100% by consent. I will not call you out. I will not put you on the spot. So if you know how to use the chat, or not the chat, the reaction feature, and you raise your hand, then that will indicate to me you want to be in the queue to speak. All right. I will ask you when you speak in this setting. Just remember, there are a lot of us here, and so I'm going to use the phrase that I learned in a leadership program, laser. Remember to focus on the purpose of what you're saying, so that we can give people as much time as possible to also share. Meredith, I first read it when I wasn't a writer. I'm rereading it as a writer. It tastes different. Gourmet. Well, you sound like a writer even describing that, Meredith. That's wonderful. And it does taste differently, doesn't it? It does taste different. All right. So let's start with the first question. And when you're ready, you can raise your hand. You don't have to wait till I'm done with the question. That'll put you in line to share. And by the way, your shares are really what make a book club work. It's not me sitting here talking at you. So in the opening chapters, Bird by Bird, Anne Lamott describes her father's advice on writing and life. Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird. How does this metaphorical advice apply to the writing process? How can it be applied to other areas of life? This feels like fairly obvious, but I would love to hear your experience of it, or ways that maybe you've used that or struggled with it. So if you want to raise your hand, I would love to bring someone else on to talk other than me right now. I did a pretty, I don't use this term very often, but I did an epic backpacking adventure starting Wednesday night, and I got back yesterday, and my body is sore. I am grateful I got out in a beautiful place in the mountains, but my God, I was hobbling to get coffee this morning, and I'm like, yeah, that I did something there. All right, who wants to raise your hand? Oh, good. Let's start with Meredith and Susan.
I'll go first. You all owe me one.
I wasn't going to call on you because I promised I wouldn't, but I was like, I'm going to call on Susan or Meredith. So
And I sensed that, so I just took the dive myself.
thank you.
So my comment is that a few weeks back during one of Lauren Sapala's lovely classes, she had us make small goals, bird by bird goals. And I remember that after she gave us that homework, the class after, she said that most of our goals were still too big. And I know that I was an exception to that because my goal was to take a folder from my bookshelf and set it on my desk. That was it. That size of a bird, I could handle. It seems laughably small, but if you do that size over and over and over, that's just another way that I've been thinking about it. Teeny tiny birds, not big birds, teeny tiny birds.
And how does that apply to other areas of life?
So the area of life that we were in during that class, I think, was just kind of general. It wasn't specifically about writing. When it comes to other areas of our life, I tend to use this is silly, but you know me. I tend to use this technique on dating sites. So bird by bird by bird, it's hard to get through them. You kind of cycle, but as long as you keep going with small goals, then you're eventually going to get a date. So I think it can apply to many things. It can apply to dating. It can apply to our grocery list, and it can apply to our writing, of course.
I love that, Meredith. And I was chuckling as you first started sharing because the hike that I just did, when I kept looking up at how far I had to go, it's like, I was already tired. I already drank 3 liters of water. It's like, oh, I will die. In fact, I should just go ahead and sit down and do that now, just because why put it off until I'm further up the hill and more tired. When I would focus on the next step, the next breath, I noticed that it was, and I look back after half an hour. It's like, oh my God, I covered what seemed like an impossible distance, breath by breath, bird by bird.
Well, that's how I feel on dating sites. On dating sites, it's a big mountain, and I may have to lay down and die. Highly possible.
Anything else that you want to talk about there? I love, there's a great way to start this.
I will briefly say one more. I will say one more sentence. I am so very delighted to see so many people here, especially so many new names. I just want to say I'm so glad you're here with us.
Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you, Meredith. That really means a lot. I just pasted the first 7 questions into chat. Feel free to review them. And it's unlikely we'll cover all of them today because we just won't have that much time. And as you see, we're going to have amazing conversations. I want you to feel free, if you if you see one of the questions that you want to raise your hand and talk about that we're not currently talking about, this does not have to be in sequential order. Okay. So I'm going to paste the remaining few questions in there. So feel free to review those. And when you raise your hand, if you feel like you're done hearing about the topic we were in the middle of, feel free to bring up the next question. All right, Susan, it's your turn.
Hello, all.
Hey.
So I think the bird by bird question, I'm sure that I am not the only recovering perfectionist in a community like this. But the issue of setting yourself up with a big project and then not being able to do anything because the steps are too big is, I think, exactly the situation that Anna's describing with her brother with the project. And I spent my whole early life not doing anything and then panic writing papers at 2 o'clock the morning they were due. So as an adult, when I got a real job and I had to actually like keep doing things like that, you don't get the end of the semester crash and die thing that you get all through college. So you have to keep going to the job, which I found shocking in my 20s. And I read all of the business books because I was in business and learned about project planning specifically. So I have learned that on bad days, between working in a small business where you have to do every job because someone has to, and also living with chronic illness, I've learned that I can write down, get out of bed, and check it off on my list for the day and feel a sense of accomplishment. It's like that little dopamine rush that you get from making a check mark. It's worth it. And I remember, Meredith, I too wrote things like, spend 10 minutes looking at the pages that you've already written, or, you know, tell yourself that you're making progress because you signed up for this class. I think what's important to me about the bird by bird concept specifically is that idea that you can do something that you can finish and celebrate it to build confidence and momentum.
That was so elegantly said, Susan. No, thank you for that. And I love how applicable, you know, it's so easy in a class like this, reading a book that is iconic as this one is, to, you know, to just kind of let it go over our heads or go, oh yeah, this is about writing. One thing I would love for us to take away from this first session is that writing is life. Those of us who are called to write are called to experience life, to notice it, to chronicle it. And the more that we can break down that barrier of sometimes I'm a writer and sometimes I'm just going through my life, the more we can eliminate that, I feel like the more fluid our writing can get, because when it's no longer sometimes I'm a writer. No, we are literally always writers. We are literally always writers, whether we're putting it on paper or not. It's still happening in there. And in fact, even that very small shift of awareness can help us begin to dissolve the imposter syndrome. It can help us realize that we are often doing the creative work internally before it happens on paper. Therefore, we can turn our antenna up to pay attention to our lives, to the way we feel, to the ways we feel, to the things that we notice, to the way other people react, to the cadence of their conversations, to all of it, right? So to me, I'm biased because, you know, we're all writers here, but to me, writing helps me. What did Anais Nin say? We write to experience life twice. Susan, you probably remember the exact words, once while it's happening and once in review, essentially. And that's not the quote, but it's essentially that. So I love writing and I love us writers because we have the job on earth to notice, to process, to share, right? The experience of it. So if you're just joining us, welcome. We're in the middle of a great conversation. I've posted in chat the questions, and I'll probably do that again in a moment. I want you to feel free as you are raising your hand to skip forward. We're on question 1 right now, but do not worry about sticking with the order of it in particular. I'll make sure we cover important stuff. All right, TJ, it's your turn. Celebrate every victory, says Meredith. Yes. TJ.
Thank you. Thank you,
God,
Susan and
I have to interrupt you, TJ. You look like
Go.
a writer, man.
Why, thank you. It's on purpose.
All right, I apologize for interrupting.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I finally feel like a writer, and I think it started last fall with your writing retreat. I did it online, and it applies to this number one, the bird by bird, because I started. I think it was probably Julia that suggested it. Just 15 minutes a day, writing 15 minutes a day. And I've been writing 15 minutes a day ever since that October retreat. And I now have 65,000 words for my memoir and my shitty first draft.
Hang on, let's pause. I want a big, no, genuinely, I want a big round of applause in chat or wherever. I would like TJ to, we need to celebrate victories, as Meredith just said. TJ, that is a magnificent win.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels like that. And I've even been called an author by another author. So
Wow.
I'm getting there. I really am sailing. But the bird by bird, it's the same thing. My wife and I started doing 15 minutes a day on 4 other areas, finance and decluttering. And, you know, it's a miracle how after just a few weeks, all the piles disappear, and all of a sudden you're on top, we are on top of things and feeling like we're really, really doing it. And that's bird by bird.
Yeah. I could not agree more. And TJ, I'm just so happy that you've had that experience of one bite at a time, one word at a time. And now you have this draft. And what do you feel like is the next step for you on that?
I'm looking around. I think I got a little bit of it on the last one with Julia. You know, what is that? There, she even mentioned there was a chapter. I felt like she was talking to me. There was a chapter on what to do with your second draft and how to approach it, and I actually have a friend who has a publishing company locally now, so a very good longtime dear friend, and so he and his wife have the publishing company, and so I'm starting to see that this can really happen, and it's very, very exciting.
How long is that dream of having this happen? How long has that been in you, TJ?
Oh gosh, I think it's I mean literally when I was in 5th grade, I started a newspaper called the Daily Blabbermouth, and I think it probably started then.
Yeah. Well, I just want to pause. And there are so many victories to celebrate in this group, and there will be. But this is a really big one, and the commitment it takes to get through all of the things. And really, it's the inertia. By the time we hit middle age, it's a lot of times it's the inertia of having tried a lot of things before in our lives. And it becomes this question of, do I really have it in me to do this? And so I just want to really honor your commitment, your willingness to follow the very simple, almost too simple practical steps, and then see this result. And I want to be here to help support you getting that thing all the way through so I can hold it in my hands. So
thank you. I'm so grateful for you and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. All right, we have some more hands up, and I'm so excited. If you're just joining us, I will paste the questions back into chat in just a moment here. I know chat is a quick moving river, and it's easy to lose these things. Sandra, you are up next.
First, I just want to say hi, Jacob. I've learned of you through my friend Linda Monk, and I'm so happy to be here. This is just this is really an amazing group. It's really beautiful what you're doing. I have been a writer and a teacher of writing all my life.
Wow.
So I'm just thrilled to see you focusing on this book, because I think it is the bomb. I think it is the best. It is absolutely amazing. And this particular point I wanted to speak on because for as long as I taught writing and as often as I told my students bird by bird, when I went to write a book, I didn't do it. I didn't do it at all. I was all over the place, just like a roller coaster trying to take on the world and put everything in this book. And it truly was not until I started, it probably took me a couple of years of nonsense before I started, wait a minute, story by story, point by point, bird by bird. And it has made such a huge difference that I just felt a real need to chime in here and say, this is awesome that you're focusing on this, because it would have saved me a lot of time if I'd had this discussion years ago. Thank you.
You know, one thing I love is your honesty. I mean, that you being willing to say, I've been a writer and I've taught writing for so long, and I still didn't know exactly how to apply all of this. I mean, I just want to honor that. That's vulnerability. And what would you, Sandra, if you're willing, what would you love to complete during your lifetime when it comes to writing?
A book that is, I love catching other people's stories, and that's what I write about, the stories you need to tell. But I would love to have a book that would be as eloquent and as beautiful, helping people write with the power of this particular book. That's why I'm here. I don't see any writing book. I mean, I love Stephen King's book as well on writing, but I mean, I love many of them. But I think she just has such voice in carrying what's important about capturing our stories, your words, and sharing it with the world, because why else? I think I can look around this room and think, why else are most of us here? You know? So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing. And I want to thank you also for modeling vulnerability like that. That's one thing we cultivate and we seek to create safety for here, but it's also not easy. So thank you.
You do it well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. All right, Nancy is up next. Nancy, and I want to see some more hands come up too. Otherwise I have to talk. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Well, thank you for being here and opening up this group to us. And my experience, I read this book a long time ago, and I love Anne Lamott, so I just started reading it again, and it's just like I hadn't read it before. So I was getting new things, and I have been working on, I had to write a testimony or an obituary for my uncle. And I'd been putting it off and dealing with other things with the probate and everything. And then after reading this and doing my morning pages every day for the last, month or so, I put down Anne's book and I said, I'm going to do this. I don't need to make it perfect. And so I just free-handed the whole thing, everything I knew, all the details, all the, dates and everything. And then yesterday I came back to it the next day and got my computer up and I just wrote it, and got it down. And I was like, oh my God, that works so well. Just not even thinking about, nobody's going to see this draft. And I did, throw that away. And then once it came to writing the other one, everything just, coalesced and it came together. And yeah, it's not perfect, but you know what? It's done and I feel good about it. And, we'll see what happens. But, I just wanted to share that because it was just something current and it wasn't a book, but it was something that I had to write and get it done and use facts. And so I'm happy about that. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, let's all celebrate this too. Thank you for sharing that. I feel like it's so important for us not to have the big win be the final book in our hands. Like that is a big win, but honestly, and later in Bird by Bird, Anne talks about it, like the day that her book was released, and she thought that was the day that she would walk out and have a tiara on her head, and everyone would know that she's a real person, a real writer. It's
Yeah.
like, it didn't happen. So these wins are actually the important ones to celebrate, because these are the ones that keep us going. So thank
Yeah,
you.
it's the first bird. It's the
Yes.
next bird. And, you know,
Every time. Yes.
yeah, so it's like the other lady said, the check, you know,
Yeah,
one off my list, check that, check that. So,
totally. Well, Nancy, before you go, what would you love to what kind of writing work would you love to complete in this lifetime?
my memoir, like
Okay.
most of us, we have all this stuff and it's overwhelming.
Mhm.
And so I'm just trying to, you know, piece all of that together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
more and more I see that, you know, snippets like in Anne's book, you know, coming out in my morning pages. I'll start thinking, and then all of a sudden something pops into my head and I just write about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see that as a, you know,
Mm-hmm.
keeping me moving forward on that.
So if you don't mind, stick with me just for a minute, Nancy. This one
Mhm.
thing that has helped me so much, I haven't written a memoir yet, eventually, probably. But every one of my books has felt very personal. And I can't remember who gave me this advice. But the advice was, tell the story to yourself. Tell
Oh,
the story to yourself.
Oh.
Because like probably you and probably all of us here, if if you don't have this problem, you're probably not here in the room today. Most of us want to keep an eye on the eventual audience while we're writing.
mhm.
And that is one of the most difficult things to let go of. And so when somebody came along and said, tell the story to yourself.
Wow.
This isn't time to tell it to the whole world. And now tell it again to yourself in the second draft, and now again in the third draft. By the time we told the story a few times, it actually begins to settle in. We begin to see the landscape better. You know, it'd be like trying to, I'm just fresh back from a big backpacking trip. It'd be like me trying to write a map of the trail without walking the trail first. I mean, genuinely.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
first draft is you walking the trail and making notes about the trail. And then the second time you're across it, by the third or fourth time, you're like, oh, I'm qualified to probably trace out a map on this thing. But the first time it's impossible.
Yeah. That's good advice. And I'm going to follow that, you know.
Well, I would remind myself of it over and over again, Nancy, because it would be like, in this day, or whatever, I'm in the middle of this chapter and I'm on a deadline and it needs to be right, and I'm under pressure to get it to the publisher, in a more or less okay form. And I would feel myself getting contracted around that idea. It needs to be right. And I would get the tap. Just all you have to do today is tell the story to yourself. What was true? What did you feel? What did you see? What did you notice? What did you learn? So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. I'll
Thank you,
keep you
Nancy.
posted.
Please do. That's what this group is for.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. Oh, Sharia. I also saw another hand up earlier. And if you put your hand up and felt nervous, don't worry, I won't bite. You can put it back up. All right, Sharia, it's your turn. So glad you're here.
Hello. Yeah, so I had an interesting perspective on this in picking this book up to start, because I haven't really read a lot of Anne's work. I've gotten bits and pieces of it over the years, but never sat down in full to take in what she does and what she's offered up to the world. But the beginning of this and talking about her father and her father being a writer, and then identifying herself as a writer. So I think I've also kind of been in this stage of the struggle with that for myself, because my mother fully identified as a writer. And so no one in our family could really compare to that, even if people did their own writing or their poetry, or they were songwriters, or even did short stories. That was her role and her title within the family. And it was not something that she had the ability to share with others. And she really struggled with that. If anybody, through our own genuine experience of the love of reading and the love of writing, wanted to put that out there, she really had a hard time with it. So it's really interesting to I think take that mirror back and shine it back on those of us who do feel that call to write, and where those hills that we have to climb have come from, and where we hold ourselves back in the process of getting things down on paper, and how we identify the value in that. And that for a group like this, being able to really honor each other, like TJ, and the amazing amount of time that he's put into this, and the devotion that he's put into it, and is preparing for these next stages. And we're looking at bird by bird, and he has already done that, and he's taken that step to get to a final area where all the birds are gathered.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. Sharia, I won't ask everyone, but I am very curious in your case also.
Yes.
What sort of writing work do you want to complete in your lifetime? It doesn't have to be one thing, many things, whatever.
Right. So that is, I think, really where I am still finding my footing. I have gotten nice responses and feedback specifically for my writings on those who've passed, and being able to honor their role in my life and reflecting that back. So I can't do that for everybody, and I don't have the depth of experience to be able to do that for everybody. So I don't know that that's where I will find my home as a writer. But I'm somebody who also found writing to be unsafe in my life, not just because of my mother, but because of others, of things that I put down on paper that were literally sought out to be held against me.
Oh
and
God.
So there's work that's been done over the years to find an aspect of safety within writing again. But I still struggle with putting everything down in one spot. So it's little bits here and there.
How old were you when those sorts of things happened?
I was 11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So deeply formative years.
Oh, very much so. And very much so that it took me another dozen years to actually put things down on paper yet again outside of school assignments. Because I had to be able to step into adulthood and realize that those issues weren't my own. But I really had to go through it and start to unpack that a little bit. Yeah.
That's thank you for sharing that. I wonder just in chat how many others have some version of that. Yeah, I'm looking at notes coming in. Go ahead and it helps us to know that we're not alone in this. And I always love to say, Sharia, you know this, when one person works, we all work. So when one shares, like, even if it seems like such a singular experience, clearly a lot of other people have felt that. I did. My mother, who is such a really wonderful person and so supportive for me about writing, didn't have good boundaries. She would go and read my diaries as a young boy, and then I would get in trouble for it. And oh my God, that created problems, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I had issues with my stepmother for a full dozen years because of her doing exactly that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you shared that. I think it's a very common experience. One way or the other, it's common, whether it was a mom or it was some shitty friends at school or whatever found something. My friends did that too. I mean, I was a weird kid, so I did stuff that not everybody else was doing, so I got made fun of for it. Oh yeah.
Oh, so Betsy, I hear you on that. I have not burned mine, but my father burned mine because of my stepmother in front of me. I was made to witness it as a whole ceremonial experience. And I know so many people who are so fearful of what they have put down in their own moments, who have burned their journals and destroyed them and made sure that they were shredded and torn and ashes because of their fear of what someone might find later or after they've passed and how they would take it. I find that writing is such a personal experience, and yet on the opposite side, you can't take it personally. Because if you do, then it becomes a whole different level of pain that you have to work through. And so I really try to honor whatever people feel the need to write and let that come out and be able to read it and then hear it from their perspective rather than from where I sit. I think it's so important. I think that's why we love to read.
Yes, I think so too, Sharia. And we're in tender territory here, as you know. Thank you. Thanks for leading the way into that. I also want to say, and I know you know this and have experience with it, one of the things I love to do in private work is grow a dialogue with that inner part, because as an adult, it's easier to have the don't take it personally perspective, but there's still a part of the psyche that's still 10 or 12 years old that still had that thing happen. And until we create a dialogue with that and find out what it needs, what that part needs to feel safe, to feel like someone has its back,
Yeah.
until we do that, that part will continue to run the show, and I know you know that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm in constant communication with
Yeah.
that part of myself in
What are
order
some-
to offer that safe space.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got excited and jumped in.
Yes.
What are some ways that you create safety for that inner 10 or 12-year-old?
First off, I acknowledge they exist. That seems to be the most important part, because there was so little of that during that time frame, because the adults really were trying to claim and declare what the parameters of life were for living.
Yeah.
So acknowledging the existence seems to be the most important part. The acknowledgement of the fact that the tools weren't there, but that at this stage, I have the tools and I can share them is also another important thing for me to be able to do, to take that back to my younger self and say, you didn't have it then, but we've got it now. Let's work on this together and do it side by side. So you're not doing it by yourself. We're going to do it together. And then acknowledging that it also can still take time. Like, just because I, as an adult, feel like I'm ready in that moment to take that back, that I have to give that child self and that child mindset and the emotional capacity the time to actually process. Because just because I think I'm ready to dive in and jump through the hoops and make it all happen, doesn't mean that it all goes away immediately. It can take time for that mindset to really go through the healing process.
I love that you're sharing this, because again, adults, we've been conditioned. By the time we hit first grade, we start to be conditioned to become part of the industrial machine of this world, which means that we have to hit deadlines a lot. We're rushed past we don't get to meander as much and ponder and daydream and the things that are needed for creativity. And so when we're approaching our inner creative selves and healing that connection, what you just said to me, Sharia, is such a great illustration of that. Like, slow the fuck down.
Yeah.
Pretend like you're sitting with a very bright, curious young person who doesn't need to get to the point or make sense or talk in straight lines yet, and shouldn't. Let's do that. Slow down.
Yeah.
Thank you so
thank
much.
you.
That's wonderful. I want to also go back and chat just for a moment here, because I feel like these are connected. Actually, Meredith said earlier, how do I write it to myself? Which version of myself? I'm writing a fantasy for young adults. Should I write it to the now me or the teenage me? Okay, I love this. And if you have any, since you put it in chat, Meredith, if anyone wants to add to that or give ideas or thoughts, I do ask us to refrain from coaching each other or fixing each other, because that makes us feel less safe about being vulnerable. One thing I want to say, Meredith, is it's kind of related to what Sharia and I were just talking about. Write it to yourself. Be the friend who doesn't need you to get to the point or have it come out perfectly or have it even going anywhere right now. Like, the delight of a friend who will listen to you while you're not making sense, but they love you. They love your mind. They love the way you tell stories. They love the way you notice things. If you treat yourself that way in the process of first draft, your inner creative self begins to notice, oh, this is my actual friend. They're not going to rush me right to some sort of an adult, perfectly pointed out logical conclusion on this thing, even if it's a fantasy story. Right. So if we can begin to befriend ourselves more and more, and not just on paper or as a concept, if you've had a breach of friendship with somebody that's gone on for some years and you both have a desire to reconnect, but there's distance and static in there, and there's hurts, and there's stuff. what is the process of rekindling that friendship? This is somebody you love. You know you're not going to get it done in 5 minutes. What sort of pop in chat? What are some practices you would do if there's a friend and you know there's a mutual desire to reconnect, but there's just distance and you wonder if it's even possible, really? What are some of the first approaches you would do to reconnect with that friend? I'll get it started. I would probably write a handwritten note and mail it to that friend. I would express my actual appreciation for them, and I would apologize. Angela says, have coffee and chat. Yeah. There's nothing like vulnerability to repair a fractured relationship, or at least resolve it. Even if it's not going to repair it and make us best friends or lovers or acquaintances again or whatever, at least we can resolve it. There's nothing like vulnerability to create resolution. How can you be vulnerable with your inner self? You know? So Meredith, back to your question and point there, and I feel like it applies to every form of writing. If we start out by not rushing to get to a point, Meredith, you're an amazing medical writer, wellness writer, and so your conditioning means that you know how to write concise pieces that are well supported and logical and make sense, and that is a skill that most of us aren't trained in. So you have that. You also have the conditioning that says this is what good writing looks like when it's finished. So it can be harder, especially when you're in a more formless kind of an environment like fantasy or fiction of some kind. It's not, I know I'm going to make a point, I'm going to introduce an idea, I'm going to do supporting points, and I'm going to have a conclusion. It's different than that. And so I think the more that you can create an environment of safety where you're telling yourself the story, and maybe take that, your boyfriend said you weren't smart enough to write big books, and he didn't realize how hard children's books were to write. Maybe go back to that age or younger and ask a younger version of yourself to tell the story. What would have delighted a 13-year-old Meredith, Come on in, Meredith.
Yeah, that's that's along the lines of what I've been thinking in the past few minutes, is when I'm working on this novel, which is barely a fetus stage. One of the things I've been asking myself is, what did I need to hear when I was 15, 13? And I think that I should do what you're talking about, Jacob, which is have conversations with, or a dialogue, I think is the word you said, with that version of myself. And also perhaps along the lines of what you were saying about friends, maybe thinking about the things I wanted to say to my friends that I didn't for one reason or another. And I think that it's kind of difficult to walk the line between preaching and teaching in a novel.
Yes, it is.
And in memoir and all of it. And that can be hard to navigate. But when it comes to fantasy writing, boy, is that fun. It's hard, but it's fun.
Yeah.
It's so fun.
Why do you say it's fun?
Yeah. So the reason why I like fantasy is that, and this comes probably from reading Tolkien when I was in 4th grade. Seeing our problems, our very human, modern, in this reality problems, seeing them in a different environment, whether it's metaphor or literal battle, and seeing how those people approach it helps me understand how I should. It's kind of like looking at big world problems as well as my own through a different lens, is how I see it. So you see the hero going through the journey, and you end up thinking to yourself, well, I'm the hero of my life.
Yeah.
Going back to hero on a mission, now that I think about it, I'm the hero of my life. I'm on my own quest. Where am I at in this quest? And what is my next step?
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to think about it that way.
Yeah.
To use the metaphors.
I love that. And Meredith, we did the Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit book club, as you know. And that was one thing that I really loved in that was he pointed out, Stephen Pressfield pointed out that whether it's memoir or fantasy or any of these other forms, if there's a character involved, if there's no transformation, there's no story. Transformation involves struggle, it involves risk, it involves breaking out of previous ideas about oneself. And so I'm curious, in just briefly in your fantasy tale, what is the change from where this character begins and where they end? Just pick one of the characters that you like the most.
Sure. So I have two protagonists, and the one that pops into my mind is the female teenage protagonist. Her journey is one of going from safety, security, and consistency and predictability to the opposite of that, to chaos and danger, and the transformation that she has to go through to survive that. She sucks at it. She is not quite very talented at being the hero of her own story. But I think the message that is relevant for more than teenagers is that you keep trying. She has resiliency, and I think, I can tie this all back in together. So when we're going bird by bird, that requires a lot of resiliency as well, because some of our birds are going to blow up as much as we try.
Right. Well, Meredith, I was just sitting here thinking as you were sharing that about the character in your story. Yeah, she's not even sure she's the hero of her own story yet. And by the way, isn't that wonderful? Like who wakes up at 5 years old or 10 years old and goes, I'm the hero of my life, and then they keep that idea the rest of their lives, and they're just always confident and resourceful and patient, and they don't take things personally and all that shit. Like none of us, we all have to learn other ways than that. Otherwise, what's this earth for? It'd be kind of boring if we're all just walking around a bunch of professional heroes. So thank you for that, Meredith. My God, I love this. All right, I'm going to jump in and look at one of our questions because we are having so much conversation that I want to cover a couple of other points. And if you haven't yet raised your hand, first of all, that's totally fine. However you show up is totally fine, unless you're turning on your mic and screaming through the mic, in which case that I will not do. But other than that, you're fine. But if you haven't yet raised your hand, we would love to have you join us in one of these things. So I'm going to just look through the list of questions. I think we've covered 3 and 4 pretty well. Benita, I'll get to you in just one moment. Thank you. I'm so glad to see your hand up. We begin touching on this, but somebody else brought it up earlier. So let's talk about question number 7. The author introduces the concept of broccoli in writing, representing difficult or uncomfortable topics that we might avoid. How do you approach writing about challenging subjects? How might facing these topics contribute to personal growth and meaningful storytelling? All right, and I want to circle back just for a moment to where we were before. Meredith, when you brought up the hero on a mission and viewing your character in your fantasy tale as a hero, I also want to just point out, because I didn't quite finish my thought. Thank you, ADD brain, for moving on to the next thought without completing a sentence. No, I wanted to finish the thought, and I would love it if you'd click gallery view real quick, just so you can see everyone here. that sometimes helps us erode the notion that we are alone. I'm just looking at all of your faces, every one of you. So glad to see you. And I want you to realize that each one of us is exactly how Meredith described her hero in her story. Each one of us as writers, specifically, and I'm using it in the writing context, how many of us showed up to writing feeling 100% good enough, skillful enough, had it together, even were able to call ourselves writers without any fear, right? None of us show up there that way. And when you come to a workshop with Julia Cameron or the writing retreat in Santa Fe or whatever it is, and someone who has done it is up there talking about doing it, it's powerful. But it's often easy to say, yeah, but I'm down here in one of the chairs in the audience. I don't know how to get from here to there across that great big chasm. So I just want to have you, as you're looking around at the other faces in this cohort today, I want you to imagine that every one of us to some degree or another is in the phase of beginning to reclaim the authorship of our own lives inside of this writing experience. Right? When you can see it that way, it becomes then something to engage in more deeply, to commit to, because it's not just about writing, it's about our lives, right? It's about our lives. And the value of your life as a human and as a writer is not writing a runaway New York Times bestseller and becoming famous and having a private jet. That's a cool result if it happens, but your value will not be increased by at the time that your book is published. And the process of getting it to that point means you have to overcome so much and grow so much and change so much. It's genuine transformation, because I see transformation as merely the process of discovering who we really are, the code that's inside that acorn self, and then become that. If you're an acorn, you're not supposed to be a birch tree or an eagle. You're supposed to be an oak tree, right? And so this process is a hero's journey of finding out who we really are, letting go of the messages and the conditioning that say we should be somebody else or something different, and becoming so much in love with who we are and the experiences that we've had and the love and the stories and the humor and the healing that we want to share with others, fall so deeply in love with that and committed to it that it can't help but become visible and useful in this world. So thank you for being here like this. All right, Bonita, your hand is up. I'm just looking here. Oh, thank you, Sharia. I was looking here, making sure I hadn't professional heroes, aka narcissist. All right, Bonita, you're up. I'm happy you're here to talk. Bonita.
It's hard to keep up with the chat. If I start reading chat, I miss what people are saying. So you're going to include that, right, when you do the replay? Because
yeah, I think I'll be able to post
don't you do
that.
I usually try to keep up, but everybody's so interesting. So what you were just saying, Jacob, reminded me of a while ago. You were in one of our discussions, you know, your story matters. You matter. Your story matters. And that's what I love about what you're saying right now. It's that because we do tend to go, well, I'm not, who am I to, get up out of the audience and align my, feel like I'm a peer with one of these masters. And yeah, it's because, we're here and our experience is what, that's what we have. That is what we have. So I really love what you're saying right now. I just wanted to also get back to what TJ was saying about the 15-minute, just take 15 minutes to do what's important. I always think I can't really get rolling when I'm writing in just 15 minutes, but I'm kind of at the editing stage right now and sorting through everything I have. And 15 minutes every day would move things along. So that's a great idea. And I'm going to get over my perfectionist thing. And I know Julia Cameron, she was coaching us on don't wait for the big 3-hour chunk. It's never going to happen. And I do get trapped by that because it's the perfectionist problem, but you know, and the decluttering, I'm going to do the 15 minutes on that every day, because in the shredding of all the stuff I have to shred, that will be very helpful. So back to Bird by Bird. The book I'm working on right now is a memoir. The section that I'm in now, it's the latter part of it, and it's as some of you have heard me talk about it, the elder care, taking care of my parents in their very, very elderly years. And that would be, the idea of it is totally overwhelming, but fortunately, as just to cope and survive the horror of that, the stress of that, I was journaling all the time, because I couldn't find any other way to just keep my sanity. And so I have a lot of birds accumulated, and I feel like now that we're focusing in on that idea, I feel very grateful to myself for accumulating that day by day. This is just went over to their house and walked in, and here we were. This was my mom. This was what my dad was doing. And so now I'm able to, I've gone through one, maybe two probably, like just going through like all the painful, journal entries and putting the piles, this definitely is relevant and goes in, this might go in, that definitely was about something else and is not to be included. But it's making it possible for me to tell the story and get my arms around it. So
yeah,
it's really powerful. And those were probably longer than 15-minute gut spills, but thank God they're there, because to go back and try to remember, I mean, you forget, and the worst things are the more you forget them, because your brain just has to.
yes. And now you're talking about the broccoli, Bonita.
That's what I was thinking.
That's the broccoli.
Yeah.
That's the stuff we dread on the plate. I don't dread broccoli in particular, but whatever it might be on my plate that I would dread. As an adult, I just don't put it on my fucking plate anymore. That's cool,
Yeah. George H.W., remember, he hated broccoli.
No, but I love this, because what you're talking about is approaching things that are emotionally charged, and that in some cases were probably traumatic in their own right. And revisiting those memories, talking with a dear therapist friend of mine, and he does a lot of EMDR, and he has to help people come out of the freeze state, which is disassociated, back down into a more resourceful state. But he said the problem is that curve, that polyvagal curve, it's not as if you just get to move directly from freeze back down into the ventral vagal, the peaceful zone. You actually have to move back through the upper ranges of fight or flight. And so anytime we return to the scene in memory of something that was difficult, we have to remember to be very gentle with ourselves, because every part of our psyche is rebelling with an instinct to say, don't go back there. That was scary. That was harmful. That hurt, right? And so being willing to walk around it, go in a circle around it, being willing to create dialogue with it, and the part of ourself that still feels that is so intense. Sometimes just taking a break from the real writing and writing a letter to the part that feels so afraid of going there can really open up a lot of useful information. A lot of times we'll get insight into the way to even handle that topic if we quit trying to write about it and write into it, write to it, and let it write back to us a bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's when we did those letters to our 8-year-old, and from our 8-year-old self and the 80-year-old self in Julia Cameron's workshop. Yeah, that was a really powerful. My 8-year-old had a lot to say.
Oh, well, and 8-year-olds do, my God, they do. And if we don't take the time to go back and reconnect with that part, a lot of times we're missing very important details.
Yeah.
And wisdom, not just details, wisdom.
Yeah, when you're fresh before the world's kind of beating you up a lot and you kind of,
Yeah.
come out a lot less confident. I do want to share what I want to write before my
Please.
time is up. I need to finish this memoir I'm working on right now, which for those of you that aren't familiar with my story, it's my memoir is my coming of age story, and then cut to, which ends right when I leave home at 17, and then cut to coming back at 50 years old to be on the front line caregiving for my parents, who lived a long, both of them, a long time. When I finished that, I really wanted to, I have this wonderful story. When I moved to Washington State when I was 35 years old, I moved up there from California because I really wanted to get a horse. I had horses as a kid, and I knew I would have to have so much money to do it in California. So I landed a great job in Washington State, moved up there, and in some wonderful act of complete random risk, bought this for $500 a racehorse that was being retired off the track. Crazy, nuts. Never, if I'd known what I was getting into, fortunately I didn't. He was the love of my life, and I had 20 wonderful years with him until he passed away. And I want to tell our story. And that is a book I really want to write. And so I just had to share that since you were asking people. And then I would love to do, I have several short stories that I've kind of written over the years. And my stories are life stories. I'm no good at fiction. I don't know why. I try to do it. It comes out very staid and stale. But there's so many stories from life. Most of mine are about animals that I've had. And so that's the third book that I really want to write before I exit. So.
All right. So let's just all take a moment and tune into Benita's, what she just said, that desire to write these different kinds of stories. Benita, thank you for sharing that out loud.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to.
Yeah. The energy of genuine desire is so powerful, and we need it. We need to pay attention to it. We need to honor it. And again, isn't it interesting that people who are, Anne Lamott, Julia Cameron, all these people we admire so much for good reason. They've done amazing, admirable work. But sometimes it's so easy to look at them and go, well, of course they get to want to write the next thing and share it with the world because they're awesome already. Who am I to really want to, who's going to care if I do? And let me just say, we care if you do. And I want us to give that gift to each other, because that's the energy, that's among the energy, the fuel sources we need to get through this. You guys, I live in Idaho. You guys is it's a non-gender specific thing, like y'all down south might be. Anyway, I did a lose my train of thought is what I did. So I'll come back to that in a moment. All right, listen, we have about 20 minutes left, and I would love to do this the rest of the day. But before we go, because I know a few of you will need to leave before we're quite done, here's the challenge I'd like to offer to you. And you're gonna, oh my God, you're gonna hate this because it's so simple. My challenge is that outside of morning pages of journaling, you promise to yourself, and if you're willing to promise it to the group, to write just 5 minutes per day on whatever it is you're writing. Now you're not limited to just 5. You're only promising 5. I did this with my cohort in a leadership program the other day, and I said I need some accountability around meditation, and they're like, oh, let's promise each other we'll meditate 30 minutes a day. I said, can we promise we'll do 5 minutes? I think our average was 12 to 15 minutes, which is to say 30. I know I wouldn't have done that every single day, and I would have started to die of shame. But 5 minutes is something I can promise myself. And even if I'm crawling in bed, I'll just sit there on the edge of the bed for 5 minutes and do that thing. whether it's meditate or write or whatever, I want to ask you, and in chat, if you're willing to make that promise to yourself during the course of this book club. TJ's experienced it. Bonita, you've experienced it. So many of you who have shared today have experienced it, the power of a tiny step forward every day. In the recovery movements and in therapy, you probably have heard the phrase esteemable acts. And when I was struggling with tremendous depression for several years, I remember a therapist said, esteemable acts. And they said, what are some esteemable acts you can do every day to remind yourself that you are resourceful, that you do have your shit together, or at least that you're willing to get your shit together. And honestly, making my bed every day, drinking a certain number of glasses of water. These became simple, esteemable acts. Now, right now, I make my bed most days, but it's not as important as it was when I was struggling in that way. So this 5-minute per day promise is simply an esteemable act. And there's this amazing feedback loop psychologically that happens. And through neurochemicals, when we do an esteemable act, even when we don't feel like it or feel capable of it, it pops some really cool chemicals in our brains, and we begin to get a reward immediately, a small reward. And this is why I don't want us to promise 15 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour of writing per day, because here's what will happen. You will write more than 5 minutes some of those days, but on the days it's a struggle even to get 5, you can do that, and you kept a promise to yourself, and it proves that you are committed. That's what, not committed to me, committed to yourself. Today is day 27. I'm looking here at your comments in chat. Ooh, I love this. I love this. Okay, yes, I'm in. All right, this is a challenge, and I'm careful about challenges. A lot of those things are like full of stress. This is a very simple challenge, and it's one I know we can all keep. And I know that if you do this for the next 60 days, it will begin to change the way you feel about writing. In fact, Jonathan Robinson, who went to be a Buddhist monk somewhere else far away for like 10 years, and he came back and began to write books. He was on Oprah a couple of times, and I asked him one time, how did you write all those books? But at the time he'd written, I think, 12 books. He's written a few more since then. And he said, 5 minutes a day. I said, what? He said, I promised myself I'd write 5 minutes a day. And he said, on the days it was a struggle, I would write the 5 minutes. But he said, often that just cracked the seal, and I would write for an hour or 2 hours. He said, I had a couple of times where I wrote for 8 hours in a day, but all I promised was 5 minutes, and 5 minutes was the win, right? Okay, well, I'm loving all of this. All right, so that's our specific, I don't like to call it homework, but commitment. And as a cohort, one of my intentions here is to draw us closer together. And I feel like today is a great example of what can happen with that, where we're sharing and where we're gaining realization. We're feeling less isolated. We're feeling like we can celebrate our own wins and each other's wins, right? And so that's really what this group is all about. And that's what a writing room, that's what we've been working to accomplish with the Heal Plus Create writing community as we move it over into a writing room with Annie Lamott and others. That is what we're creating here. It is not just some sort of celebrity or quasi-celebrity experience where you get to come and sort of warm your hands around the fire, and then go home and feel lonely and like I'm not good enough still. It's like, no, I want every one of you to finish the book or books or screenplays or poems or whatever it is that you care about. I want you to finish those in this lifetime. I want you to do that. And whether that lifetime is 1 year longer or 60 years longer, none of us really knows. Gaining a sense of urgency without a sense of it being intense pressure. Just a sense of, this is my life we're talking about. This is my life. This is the expression of my life. Not all the expressions, but this is an important expression of my life from my inner creative self, which, as I see, is connected to the divine in some way. All right, I'm looking at all of your chats here. Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Good question. 5 minutes in addition to morning pages. So morning pages is its own thing. You're communicating with yourself. This is 5 minutes on the project that feels like the project you're currently in the middle of. It's okay if it's editing. I would also, though, invite you, if you're in a deep editing phase, to because it's a different part of your brain that is at work when you're editing versus, writing fresh. It's okay to use that 5 minutes on editing. I want to invite you to use this time, this 5 minute space that might turn into an hour. I want to invite you to use that on writing something that is going forward, not going backward, because editing is going backward and forward and backward and forward, and it's a powerful and necessary part of the process. But I want to invite you to get into the brainwave state of creativity, of curiosity, of openness, because that by itself will also send you back to your other projects, your editing or your rewriting. It'll send you back with more sense of juice, of aliveness, of I have this, of I can do this, right? So use the 5 minutes as a place to write curiously, to tell the story to yourself, to explore forward. Or Benita, let's say that you're editing on this and you go, you know what, I'm going to use the 5 minutes to write a chapter that's not even currently in the book. It may not stay in the book, but it's going to be something fresh, you know? All right, I'm looking here. I may write for 4 minutes and 50 seconds, then I'll close my eyes, breathe, and celebrate for 10 seconds, says Meredith. Perfect. I love it. Wendy, yes, it's like grabbing time. It is exactly grabbing time. It's not just like it is it. And also, those of you who have read Stephen King's On Writing, you know, one thing I loved about his story was that he talked about when he wrote Carrie, he and his wife both were working at a laundry. They didn't have any time and they had little kids at home. They had no time and no money and no space and no editing help and no anything. So he would write on 15 or 5 minute cigarette breaks, sitting on the porch of the laundry before he went back in and, you know, took a salt tablet and went back to working sweatily. Okay, so we've established that we are going to write 5 minutes a day on a project outside of morning pages. I want to invite you to use morning pages as a way to explore resistance, as a way to tell the truth about how you're feeling about what you're writing, about your day, about yourself. And then once you've done that, and it doesn't have to be sequential, you know, or contiguous, but once you've done the morning pages, pick another spot in the day. You'll give yourself the 5 minutes. If you can pick yourself a spot where you're promising 5 minutes, but there might be space around it for it to turn into 15 or 20, I think that's brilliant. Meredith wondered why smokers get extra breaks during the workday. Take a poetry break, not your break, touch a tree break. I think that's brilliant. I'm addicted to touching trees, just like you are to cigarettes. So, all right. The second question was, how many weeks is this going to go? That's a little bit fluid. But I expect this to be over the course of the next 2 months. Let's take a moment and look at our calendar and set the next date now. And don't worry, I will post all of this back in the groups and I'll send it by email as well. So you won't have to worry about remembering all of this, but let's have a look at our calendars. And trying to get used to my Outlook calendar, which today's the 16th. Okay. I'm thinking our next one should be the 29th. And that is a Saturday. I know that we're all dealing with, thank you, Heather. I see you have to run. Thank you so much. I will email everyone the questions, pardon me. This time I'm not getting choked up because I'm crying. Let's see, I will email the questions. So I'm gonna say let's do it on Saturday the 29th. And making sure that I don't have anything else on that time. And we struggle.
That's not a Friday. That's not a Friday.
No, not according to my calendar.
Okay.
But Charles, check that. I am prone to missing things. So Saturday the 29th
looks like a Saturday the 29th. Okay. Something must be Saturday of September.
Probably. All right. So this time it's this month, July 20 is the 29th. And I see it confirmed. Well, I'm glad we did this because now we've cemented the fact that Saturday the 29th is the day. I'm thinking I'll do it at 1 p.m. Mountain, which is noon Pacific. That's let's see, 1 p.m. Mountain, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Central. One thing we can't, thank you all for confirming this, because I did go into a bit of a existential crisis there, not knowing what day that day might have been. 11 Pacific, Benita says, is that your request or is that what you were saying I was saying? I can do 11 Pacific. That's noon Mountain. So one thing we struggle with here is that we're from all over the US. We're also more and more from all over the world. And so we just can't quite always hit a time that works for everyone. However, if you're all, yes, thank you, Benita. If you are all committed to being part of the cohort, I'm totally willing to do replays. As I said at the beginning of today's session, replays often get kind of disregarded because they don't have the same energy. I mean, who wants to sit here for 90 minutes and watch other people talking to each other when we can't be part of it? However, since we're making promises to each other and ourselves, and we're actually engaged in work, I will do replays, and I'll make sure that those get posted in the group you're in, and also out by emails to you. So today's session will be recorded, and I'll send it back to you along with the questions. And I think I can attach the text file as well from all the chat.
If you
all right.
don't mind me jumping in, for me, mainly I'd like to have the questions and your kind of elaboration on each one in the replay. Not so much, you're right, it would be way too much to try to watch this again, but that, I don't know if there's some other way that you can capture that. But anyway, just sorry to unmute myself, but I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, thank you, Benita.
If there's a way to do it, I don't know.
Well, there is, and we're getting toward where we can actually have a producer to go back through and pull out the most salient points. We're not quite there yet. So, but I will send the replay, and you can skip forward, backward and forward a bit. And then people who weren't able to be here today, I'm just saying, I don't want to create replays for busy work for me or my staff, because if it's not going to get used, then why use it? Why do it? But I want to provide that if possible. The other thing before we go, so don't worry, I'll post this in all the groups and email you and make sure we know when the next thing is going to be. And Key asks, is there a certain number of chapters we should complete before the next meeting? And I think that's a marvelous question. Thank you for helping me keep my ADD brain. Short assignments, shitty first drafts. Let's see here. So I did basically the introduction through chapter 2 today. Let me find the table of contents. Let's go from, in part 1 on writing, let's go from perfectionism down through page 87, which is how do you know when you're done? So if you read all of part 1 before the next session, you will have covered what we're gonna cover in the next session. These are a little bit less structured than a book, say, like Hero on a Mission that we did recently, because there aren't exercises at the end of each chapter or section, and so it's not quite as built for this sort of work. But let's get through the first section before the next one on the 29th, and I'll come with a list of questions prepared to help guide us. Those are just a guide, though. Clearly, we didn't touch on every single question today. You, in your conversation and sharing, have helped us pretty much cover everything that was there, though, that was important. And then before we go, Meredith has a question here. We talk about claiming I'm a writer, I'm the hero of my own story. I think it's important to reclaim it, perhaps on a regular basis. Life strips away those identities. That is so true. And I feel like, Meredith, that's part of what this cohort is meant to do for each other, for ourselves, is reclaim it one bit at a time, one bird at a time, right? And so let's commit as part of what we're doing here, the 5 minutes per day, the showing back up for the next session, or the replay. And honestly, it's okay. Like, I don't want anyone to feel like I'm a lower class citizen because I couldn't make it. Summer is always a busy time, and we all have busy lives. So if you can't make it to the live session, just know that you're missed. But engage in the groups where we're going to be having these discussions and continuing to share our wins and our progress and our struggles, not just wins and progress, also struggles and the days that we didn't feel like we got anything done, right? Thank you, Grace. I see a lot of important content. Glad you're going to have a replay. Yeah, and I love making replays and making them available. I don't resent that at all. I just don't like doing stuff that people aren't going to use. So as long as we're going to use it, I'll absolutely provide it. All right, you all, I love you. Thank you for being here, and for let me start that word over again, for providing such a committed, engaged experience together, and for celebrating yourself and each other. Thank you for celebrating your own desire and urge to write. And if I do one thing with you, and this isn't me doing it to you or for you, it's us doing it together. If I can do one thing with you here, it is to say that we are real writers, and what we have to say is important. And the more we can unhitch that from the terrifying goal of having it become a bestseller or create some sort of fame or validation for us, and we can't completely unhitch that. There are too many cultural messages that beat that into our heads. But the more that we can unhitch that and relax and get into the joy of writing, of expressing ourselves, of loving ourselves, of sharing the life that we are learning how to love, of sharing the struggles of the life that we're learning how to love, the more that we can do that, the more we will have the energy and the courage and the commitment to go all the way through, right? To go all the way through. And that's what I'm here for. I'm not here to gather a bunch of people so I can talk to you about writing, so I can keep being a writer. I'm interested in having you win. And I'm not talking about the machismo winning that is so much part of our culture. I'm talking about the feeling down deep in your soul that says, I'm doing what I came here to do. I have many things to do. This is one of them. And this is maybe one of the harder ones to do. So thank you for that. All right. I feel like the Sunday sermon is over. I love you all. Thank you for being part of this. If you're joining us for the writing retreat, we are working to bring all of this together. The folks who were with us for the Julia Cameron series recently, our Heal Plus Curate writing group, and that we're morphing into the A Writing Room writing community that includes the transformational writing retreat in Santa Fe or online. Thank you for being part of all of these things. Thank you for helping us create it together. If you can join us for the Santa Fe thing, whether online or in person, we would love that. Share it with your friends and people around you. We are wanting to make every one of these outreaches of expressions, we want every one of them to be a celebration of life together, of ourselves and each other together. Because my God, doesn't the world need more of that? People who are alive and engaged in what they really care about, and healing and sharing and supporting each other. I just feel like this is a microcosm for what will make this world a better place. So thanks for helping me do that. All right. I love you all. See you back in the groups. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Thanks for being here.